everyone. Welcome to tonight's webinar, all about lessons identified and lessons learned. Kind of a double, right, Thomas? It's both a part of our Build With Us webinar series, but it's kind of a standalone. So it's a bit of a special, right?
Oh, that's very true. I mean, lessons learned, lessons identified can be useful for most organizations. And I also want to spend a few minutes talking about it before we jump into Build With Us, because it's actually not that complicated to support it in Monday.com. Let's start with, for instance, there are a bunch of misconceptions about lessons identified and lessons learned. The lessons learned process is not incident reporting. Incident reporting could be feeding lessons identified. Like, we have a lot of incidents happening in this plant around this section. Maybe something's wrong. This is something to examine. And it's quite common that you see consultancy firms that try to build like lessons learned into like the project execution as just an evaluation thing. And so it's really not. Incident reporting, no. After action review, no, that's not lessons identified. That's not lessons learned. That's just an after action review where we say, what did we do good? What could we improve? And based on that result, we might push something to the lessons identified or lessons learned process. But just having that conversation in the after action review, don't make the mistake of calling it lessons learned.
Yeah, I think it's quite common that people try to equate them.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's one of those. It started in the armed forces, and it's a cool term. So obviously, like all other military stuff, consultancy firms, they take them, they try to use the cool military words, and they don't really understand it, and then they become something else. Where do you think the SWOT analysis came from?
Yeah, I know. And I also know what happened to some of the leadership educations when they turned civilian.
Incident reporting is super important, and by doing an analysis on your incident report, you can see commonalities that require you to start some kind of lessons learned process. The after action review might result in some bullets that are very important, like, we did something wrong during this procedure. I can tell you, my daughter came through a C-section. As soon as the baby was out, they had sewn up the wife. They started an after action review inside of the surgery room in front of us. It's like, what did we do good? What could have been improved? Is there something that we need to learn? And everything was fine because it was all condensed to that team and how they work together. They had no feedback that needed the whole hospital to get involved in reviewing the processes or routines or documentation, right? So again, after action review, super useful. Use it, do it, but it's not lessons learned. And if you search, I did a search on lessons learned before this, and I saw so many project lessons learned documentations about how you do lessons learned, in quotation mark, for all the different phases of your project. And basically it was just a project evaluation with a really cool name. But the problem is that those terminologies are being wrongly used, and it is quite hurtful for the process because it's a super important process. So let's say, okay, what is lessons learned then? So we have lessons identified, and we have identified an issue, problem, or a weakness. We need to apply an analysis, and then we have a lessons learned process, which say we have understood the issue, problem, or weakness. We have changed our training processes and supporting documentation in order to drive the desired change to eliminate the issue, problem, and weakness that we had identified. And Frederick, you who are a less army person, is there any other words we should say this in?
No, they are quite clear spoken because it's much more. That's the kind of scope of it. It's not just at the end of a project saying, this is what happened. It's a bit more tinkering.
So let's take a tangible example, right? We are a web shop. We're selling dropship products, and for some reason, we have an abnormally high percentage more of aftermarket support tickets for one particular product about the colors not matching the website, right? That is something that we have identified, that we have more complaints about this particular product only for this color. What's the deal? So that's the lesson identified. That's all. We have identified an issue. The issue then needs to be addressed. So we do an analysis. As part of the analysis, we say, okay, quick action. Let's put a disclaimer on the website saying like colors may change or may appear differently live than on the screen or something like that. But when we start looking into this, we realize that nobody has in the office, in our own company, has actually looked at the product that we are drop shipping. So this is now a lessons learned that every new product should always be physically tested, visually inspected by the company before putting it on the web page, right? That's one of the important lessons learned. This is where we have changed our standard operating procedures. We don't just go and source a cool item on the web. We order it, we look at it, we take our own pictures, upload our own pictures, and also make sure to match them as much as possible. But never again putting an item on the web page that we haven't visually verified. It might sound like a stupid example, but I'll tell you, 80% of most like product selling websites that do drop shipping have never seen the stuff they're selling.
Would you say that lessons identified, lessons learned is best done without a single case? So actually, so we see that this is like a repeat offense, whereas like, I mean, a project review that, yeah, that's for that specific project. We know what happened in that specific project, but we don't know the repeatability of it, or what would you say to that?
Well, you do have a point. If we're talking like normal business, you probably want to see like trends and start acting on trends. But if we talk about this from a generic perspective, the army being the biggest driver of the lessons learned and lessons identified process, this actually became quite popular during the conflict in Afghanistan, where the opposing forces started using IEDs. With the first few IEDs, this became a lessons identified. The opposing force is behaving in a way that we are not used to. We don't know what to do. So a big like organization started looking into this, cultural studies, technical forensics, and it ended up with changing the whole pre-deployment training process, creating SOPs about how you approach intersections, and also about road selection and so on. So in that case, it's also in some cases you don't want to wait, right, Frederick? Sometimes you really want to start this process early. But I think you're starting to see the difference, that it's not like any feedback that becomes a lessons identified to go into a lessons learned process. It actually needs to be a feedback that we can act upon.
So basically, all lessons identified should eventually become a lesson learned.
That's the aim, at least. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, there's no such thing as 100% accuracy, unfortunately. But
I mean, you have if that's their lesson identified. I don't know what lessons learned will drive from that. But if the lessons identified is that when we get this kind of project, we always seem to be delayed in this phase, and we don't have higher than 6 in a CSAT for these kind of projects. That's an interesting thing to start the lessons identified project process around, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, feedback is good. Feedback is always nice, but feedback is supposed to be your data. And by doing analysis on the data, that's when you find your identified lessons. So a project review, a project evaluation, I mean, you should definitely do it as part of project closure, but doesn't mean that we need to start a big lessons identified project process.
No, it could be a one-off.
Exactly. So is there anything we need to say about this? Is there any questions in the chat so far? So as for credentials, because we're still we're not only talking Monday here, so people might wonder why is this guy here sitting and telling us that so many people are wrong. I am from the Army leg of the lessons learned part. I don't see lessons learned as an evaluation after action process. It's quite a big process. It takes actually a dedicated organization. Most organizations that does lessons learned, they have a special task force for each identified lessons to make sure that it gets the attention it needs, cross-functional, to make sure that the whole organization is represented in what kind of lessons we need to draw from this issue, problem, or weakness.
Basically, you've been working with it.
Yeah. I have done several lessons learned processes live for both where lives are at stake and where not lives are at stake processes.
Confident in saying, listen up, guys.
All right. So with that said, let's really now hammer through that you don't need a super expensive consultant to help you with setting this up in Monday. This is a rather simple process to support from a technical perspective. The hard thing here is the mental thing, like the management thing. What actions do we do? How do we actually learn from this? And that, unfortunately, Monday will not help you with that part.
And on that part, you're on your own.
Right. New board? So let's call this lesson. There we go.
It seems to be correct.
Ah, wow. Cool. So really, we don't want to discriminate. We want to make it as easy as possible to actually submit something into the lessons identified process. The more like toll gates, levers and stuff we put in place, the less likely we are at encouraging our personnel to come forth with stuff that they feel we should work on, right? So we really want to keep that simple. The aim here is to allow a submission for form, right? So we are going to set up a board where we see every single submission as a potential lessons identified. So we're going to have a name for the item, of course. We are going to need a status. We are going to need like a longer description. And I'm thinking that maybe we should just allow them to do that as an update, the first update. But yeah, no, let's do it as a long text for now because it makes for a really nice item card. We do need a status. In this case, we're basically saying that everything that comes in is a new. We have some kind of review. And then start lessons learned. Let's keep it at that for now. We want some kind of drop down and ask for boxes. So what we're saying is this in sales? And right now, so I'm starting to make an error here because I'm thinking like I want to know what process this relates to so I can start categorizing it, right? But I will never think in the same way as the rest of the employees. So if I put like sales, marketing, website, support. I mean, that might not be what they want to call it. So let's actually be smart here and insert a text column for process. So we can start gathering data at least, and then we can use that as a grouping, and possibly later on, when we see what's being submitted, we can turn that into a drop-down column. Cool.
My brain just went, oh yeah. I would have gone straight for the time.
Yeah, and I did as well. I mean, this is why it's so important to think about like what kind of behavior you want to drive with your boards as well. I mean, the optimal column type is still the drop down, but I'm pretty confident that I wouldn't be able to get all the single potential labels that someone else might want to put there, right?
Yeah, you might end up with a ton of various.
Yeah, exactly. And let's do a lead column. Who's going to be lead for this process, right?
So all of your salespeople, this is another type of lead.
Is there a better English word for it? I don't like owner. I don't want to call it project leader because it's not project leading.
No, lead, manager, whatever. Lead's fine. Everyone here, we know what we mean, right? Okay.
Awesome.
And you may call it what you want. That's a fine thing about Monday.
So let's create our form, because we don't need any more to create the form, right? Please use this form to submit your potential lessons identified. And then we can put like links to like helping material and stuff like that. Name, everybody's looking at me just typing, process. Workflow or other operational, would you say the problem or weakness belongs to, right? Please describe the issue, problem / weakness in as much detail as possible. And if this is the big difference between lessons identified and incident reporting. If you do incident reporting, you also need to collect like what's the date and the time and the geographical location, but you also normally ask about what do you think could have alleviated this issue. But you don't need to ask about that in a lessons identified process, because that's what the process is meant to answer. And we're hiding the status. New submission, blah, blah, blah. Perfect. The form looks awesome. Testing the form. Post sales. Customer keeps. There we go, submit. And we now have our nice little item to start working on. I think it's good to look at this from an actual case. So we're building this actual form here. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to say, okay, this is in review. And right now we don't have anything that's happening right now. we're reviewing, we're looking at it. Let's make sure we have a nice item card to look at while we do this review. Let's do status and lead. Oh. Let's move that one down here and let's give it a big, nice space to be read at. Now we have our status, our lead. We can see our description down here quite nicely. That's all we need for now, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. In the next step, we can either have this as a pure intake, and once we say we want to start the lessons learned, we move the item to another board where we have the whole lessons learned. Normally, you don't have that many submissions, so I would say that warranted. So I would actually say, let's just add a group. That will be active analysis, right? So when we say start lessons learned, we want it to move down to active analysis. Let's make that automation straight away. Invite them to group, active analysis, and create automation. Yeah, and now we really want them to assign a lead. So we are going to add with, so you're adding a lead, and then we need to start working with some sub-items because that's where the magic happens, right? In a lessons identified, the whole process is here. This is where stuff's going to happen. Quick actions. I think Zacharias is not super happy.
I was hoping you couldn't hear him, but no, he.
No, that's fine. Hope it's nothing too serious.
No, I think he's having a bad day. That's about it.
Gotcha. So really, like now, we are basically treating this as a project. So we are giving like what initial analysis, briefing, presenting actions. So this would more or less be, in my opinion, the 4 minimum sub-items that we want on each item, right? Quick actions, like what do we need to do straight away? Then we do an initial analysis, we need a brief, and then we need to present our actions. And then we will continue, but everything after this will be bespoke, right? I'm doing what I'm always doing. I'm taking a photo here of my items so I can go into the automation, and I could actually add it to the same trigger. I don't need to make this into 2 ones, but if I go in here, I can no longer add anything to this automation. There is actually a trick to this. If you go in and you say duplicate automation, now I have the full control. So now we can say plus create sub-item plus sub-item. And that will be our first. Quick action. Like that. Perfect. Then we have initial analysis. Briefing. And action.
I think that should be findings.
Yeah, exactly. Create automation. And then we just delete the old one. So that's a good, and if we then want to add some sub items later on, you just duplicate this one, you add what you need, and then you delete it, the old one. So
yeah, that's actually a rather good tip. Otherwise, you can end up with what I've seen in accounts with like 3 or 4 very similar automations adding different sub items by the same trigger.
Yeah. And now we're adding a new item, and we're just testing the automation to make sure that everything works as hopefully intended. So there we go. It moved, and now 1, 2, 3, 4. Awesome. Refresh, because I pressed it too quickly. And obviously, we want to mirror all of this up to the main item. Mirror at the board. So let's link it to the sub items. Let's get the status. And let's duplicate. And get the date span. There we go. Action status. Timeline. Actions. So I will obviously be the owner of working all of these. Let's say that I have completed them today. So now I do, of course, need to add like what's the next steps. So this will be update SOP to reflect column. And then I'm using the actual checkbox feature here to make sure that I get a good little checklist. Always, never publish an item on the store without first ordering it to the office for visual inspection. Then we need to say, don't oversaturate images. Try to focus on portraying real colors, not cool filters. And then we have some other lessons learned, I guess.
Order at least 2 products to see if there's a color variance.
But let's add that. So the lessons learned process, again, this is not a repository to create like the knowledge base of every changes we need. The lessons learned process, when you're done with the lessons learned for an issue, a problem, or a weakness, you are killing this, because the documentation, the result of what you're doing should be reflected somewhere else. If the knowledge only sits in the lessons learned process, you haven't done the lessons learned. You're still on lessons identified.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, you actually need to take those actions as well, right?
Yeah. So that's why I'm saying, like, you don't need to create like a repository of knowledge bases and stuff like that. That's something else. Lessons learned is about Gustav and, in this case, Frederick going in and make sure that we change our standard operating procedures to reflect this. That's what we need to do. And once it's done, we need to validate it, right?
Yep.
And we can also say, like, you know what? The process was not done well enough, so we need to restart it.
Yeah.
And I want to be quite cocky with everybody here because I keep saying that this is not a repository for done lessons learned. So when you change validated, that's it. The lessons learned is done. You have updated all the other stuff. So we're actually going to be doing quite an aggressive thing. When status changes to validated, archive item. Obviously, this is quite bold, but it's to push the correct behavior again. If I let them sit in a group in the bottom of this board, I will have people referencing items here for, oh, can you tell me what the latest is on how we should do new product acquisition? It's like, yeah, I'll tag you in the lessons learned. No, that's not how it works.
You go to the procedural handbook, which is now updated.
Exactly. So we validate, it's gone.
So with that said, you might have that operational handbook within Monday as a knowledge base.
Yeah.
But those should probably not be the same thing. That
Exactly.
should be updated from the lessons learned. It shouldn't be the lessons learned.
Yeah. That's so true. I mean, we need to reflect the lessons in training, personnel instructions, standard operating procedures, agreement templates. I mean, it could be any kind of actions that need, and we need to update the agreement. We need to update the terms of service to reflect this thing. I mean, when you're done with the lessons learned, there's nothing left for the item. It's just a record. So if you want to keep a record of what have we done, how much work, how much time have we spent on this, that's really awesome. That's something totally different. But I want to go as far and say, let's not have that this time because I want to drive the behavior.
And you can actually do the best of both, because you can archive the item and create a new item in another board, just like a data point.
You're absolutely right. And then obviously, if you want to have like other columns to support you, saying like, it's not enough with lead, I want to be able to see who are the subject matter experts that we need to bring into this process. That's totally fine. Like everything, we are trying to show you the basics here, which gives you freedom to add on top of it.
Yeah, exactly. Don't copy paste, guys, but think, what do I need to support my process? But here you have the basics and the basic setup of how to operate it. But then do you feel, do I need a file column? Yeah, maybe I do. Oh, well, add a file column.
Yeah. I did consider it, but I figured that I wanted to still keep it very simple.
Yeah.
But it was part of my decision process not to have it here. Is there any questions? I know that it might not be a very Monday heavy one in this case. I think this is a good way of showcasing also how you can have something created in Monday. You then create additional work items, and then once you're done, it goes into the archive, done. And you have been a lot wiser thanks to the process.
Yeah, not everything is for keeping everywhere, right? Yeah. Or in this case, this is kept everywhere, not just specifically here.
Yeah, exactly. Frederick, I'm not seeing the chat. And if you want to like discuss your lessons learned processes and anything like that, I'd be happy to oblige. Obviously, if you want to discuss risk management, incident management as well, that's something we love doing as well. And we are going to have risk management, right, for the next build with us.
Yeah, which is going to be on the 7th of September. But with that said, guys,
peace and love.